So good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Ulf Knapp. I'm product manager for process management in SAP Cloud ALM. Besides the pure process management functionality, I also look after the process authoring functions that we offer in Cloud ALM. So this presentation will actually be about process management and process authoring. Okay, so first of all, the usual disclaimer. You know, everything we say might change over time, so take it with caution. Okay, spread the word, please. Use the hashtag ALM Summit in your social media posts to make others aware what we are doing here. Okay, so like it was said in the introduction, so we have question and answer at the end of the session. We also have the option to answer questions during the Meet the Expert sessions, which will happen this afternoon. Still, we try to also answer questions at the end of this session, so I hope the timing will work out. Let's see. So what is the agenda for my session today? I want to get the whole thing started with a brief introduction on the SAP Enterprise Architecture Methodology, because this is, so to say, the lingua franca that we try to establish to really talk the same language when it comes to processes. And you can imagine the process talk, this is really like so many people have different opinions how you should talk about processes, what are processes, and so on and so forth. And here, at least within the SAP organization, we have one common picture how we want to talk about processes, and this is actually given by the SAP Enterprise Architecture Methodology. First insight into that, this is the first chapter. Then I will go into the process authoring functions. So some weeks ago, some time ago, we already released the functionality to model or to define your own custom solution processes. And you could do a little bit of graphical modeling there. You could do solution value flows. What we will add very soon is also the possibility to model solution process flows, which is essentially BPM and modeling. And I think it's also worth a little demo. So it will be a little bit lab review that you can also get an impression how the process modeling portion in Cloud ALM will look like. Then we go to one of the core functions to really implement SAP solutions, and there we go into the process management functionality. This is then about process scoping, so determining the project implementation scope. And we will also, or I will also show you what are the processes available or offered by SAP that you can put into scope of your implementation projects. And we will also talk about the possibility to add now your custom processes to the process scope. And then for sure, we will talk about fit-to-standard workshops. So fit-to-standard workshops are really the core to really understand what is the actual process or project scope, because project scope is quite often like the combination of the processes you set in scope, but also the requirements you have. Yeah, because if you have, for instance, extension requirements, that will certainly influence the effort you have to spend in the project. And so as an implementation partner, for instance, if you are asked to define a fixed price project, you need to know what are the requirements and you need to know what are the processes, and only both in combination really can tell you what needs to be done. So I will also do a demo. So I try to work over the slides as fast as possible. I'm not always good in that, so sometimes I talk too much. But I try my best to go through the slides very fast so that we have some time for demo, and then after that we also have time for Q&A. So let's work over the slides. Enterprise Architecture Methodology. that high-level picture, I guess you've seen it several times already, even in other SAP implementations, presentations. But what I really like about that slide, it shows you the diversity of perspectives you can take. Because you see on the left-hand side, you see products listed. So the different products talk about processes, and they talk about processes from a product perspective. But on the right side, you also see then, for instance, in the upper area of that house, you see terms like front office sales, marketing, service support, finance, and so on and so forth. And that's more the line of business perspective that people could take. So if you are in a customer organization and you are in the finance department, then you are concerned about finance processes or the finance functions we offer. If we talk about the HR functions, then you are in this area. So it really depends on where you are in an organization. But at the same time, there are also people that talk about cross functions. And this is now a very interesting aspect about processes. If you discuss processes, you will find out that there are certain processes that are restricted to certain line of businesses, so that are modular processes that only run in one particular product or even in one particular line of business. But there are also processes that really span across multiple products and multiple line of businesses, and that are naturally the more complex processes, but also quite often the most important processes in terms of value chain. So a lead to cash process, a source to pay process, that's not a process that's restricted to one product or one line of business, that really across multiple areas. And now the question was, how can we now define a meta model that describes processes independent from the different perspectives, so that we can apply the same language to describe processes for all the different perspectives? So no matter if I'm in a product, in a line of business, or if I talk about an end-to-end process, how can I now establish a language that serves all these different needs? And the answer to that was, after long discussions that I can tell you, was the SAP Enterprise Architecture Methodology. And in the Enterprise Architecture Methodology, you can, from a very high level, just say there is the bluish area and there is the yellowish area. Blue is business talk, yellow is solution. Business talk usually is a perspective where you talk about processes from a solution agnostic point of view. So you don't have any particular software product in mind when you talk about the business processes, but you define what are the business processes you need to operate in your corporation, and what are the capabilities and what are the abilities I need to maintain. So, and here, for instance, one core element, and that you will also later see in the Cloud ALM, is the business process variant. A business process variant is one particular business process that you need, and that can be implemented by a solution. And that's why we have that red link into the yellow solution area, because there you see, corresponding to the business process variant, a solution process. And the solution process is, so to say, the response, the IT response to the business perspective defined business process variant. And in the solution process, there we know exactly what are the solution components, what are the physical systems doing the job. We know exactly what is the product vector. Yeah, we exactly know what are the solution process flows. So we know what are the solution activities and what order do we need to execute the solution activities to perform a certain job. So here we talk concrete solutions and concrete products serving a certain business process. Attached to the solution activities, you then also find the more technical artifacts like the solution actions. So there we talk about the very concrete data entries you have to perform on a UI, for instance. And if we talk about data entries on the UI, then certainly we also talk about the actual executable doing the job, the concrete theory, for instance. So all these elements are then attached to the solution activities, doing the activities in the systems. The solution process flow describes you what is the overall order of activities you perform in the system. The solution process forms you the bracket that combines all artifacts together that belong to the process execution and that responds to a particular business process variant that is then defined on the business side. So this is how the different things come together, and you see that you can for sure extend that picture here by multiple additional perspectives. You can talk about the configuration when we talk about CBC, for instance, that you have on the top right. You can take a more capability focused perspective that you see on the top then of that slide. But there are also perspectives that are not visible on this slide, but are considered in the overall concept. For instance, APIs, data model. There are so many different perspectives, so many related domains that we can then also associate into this shared core model here. In SAP Cloud ALM, we focus very much on the process perspective, and we focus, as we are doing implementation projects, we are focusing very much on the yellowish area. So the core concept for us in Cloud ALM is a solution process, because this is something we can implement. This is something where we can talk about transports. This is something where we can talk about executables I need to implement. This is where I talk about concrete configuration. This is something I can really do in the system. So this is the core of our Cloud ALM activities. Okay, that's the enterprise architecture methodology. When we talk about the Cloud ALM, and that's what I said at the beginning of the presentation, we are at two areas that really focus on processes. It's on one hand side, the process authoring. This is an environment where you can define your own custom processes. And we follow here also the SAP Enterprise Architecture Methodology. So for instance, here on the left-hand slide, you see a screenshot of the authoring environment where process modeling is done. And there you see that we modeled there a solution process flow. So that follows clearly the enterprise architecture methodology. And on the right-hand side, you see the process management portion. This is where we talk about implementing the SAP software solutions. This is where you gather the requirements. This is where you attach your documentation. This is where you really make sure that you have everything documented and captured that you require for your implementation, that you capture there your implementation status, for instance. Is it in design? Is it already in realization? Or is it even already in production? That's all what you do on the right side on the process management portion. So left-hand side, authoring, right-hand side, solution implementation, so to say, and both following the enterprise architecture methodology principles. So we discussed the solution process flows and the solution processes there. Okay, and that brings me to the process authoring. Let me talk about the process authoring a little bit. I really hope that I have at the end of the session a little bit time to demo that to you, because the process authoring, if you look into that architecture picture here, architecture, this is a mixture of marketing and architecture. Why do I call it like architecture? Well, because it's not really an architecture picture, but it's rather marketing, but it shows you architecture elements. So it's an architecture. It should just show you how the different blocks relate to each other. That's not a concrete architecture for sure. The process content on the left-hand side, where you have the authoring and the editing, this is where you define your custom processes. And the nice thing about the modeling environment that we have here in Cloud ALM is that you can define your custom processes, and then you see that orange line with the label activate. then you can activate those processes into the central process repository. So every Cloud ALM tenant comes with a library of processes that you can use in your projects, that you can scope into an implementation project. And with the activate step, you model that the model processes are just activated side by side with the SAP content, with partner content into the central library of processes. And then if you define your project, your implementation project, then you can just pull in the custom processes like you pull in every SAP or partner process. So there is no special treatment or the like. It's just a standard procedure that we have there, and the process authoring just allows you to enrich the SAP standard library with your own custom processes. So that has been the idea behind that architecture here, or behind that architecture. So how does that look like now in the tool? So we have there the option to create solution processes. So as said, following the SAP Enterprise Architecture Methodology, solution processes are concrete implementable entities that have a relation to a concrete runtime. So there are concrete applications behind. So from that perspective, you see on the two screenshots on the right-hand side, you see first a list of solution processes. That list is just the list of implemented, of described custom solution processes. We have a create button there. So, and with that, you can just define your own processes. And then you can create your processes, and then you can define solution value flows. This is like a value flow perspective. So why do we add value flow perspective here? So sometimes solution processes become rather coarse-grained. And then the question is always, how can I make clear what is the functional scope that is covered by the solution process? And then it makes a lot of sense to not just have the solution process flows that order the different concrete activities you perform in the systems, but to also give like a high-level perspective, a high-level picture what the scope is. And there we use the value flow diagrams, because those with just boxes representing modular building blocks of the solution process, and then using business activities with chevrons, that's easy to understand, that's quite abstract. But for instance, in a discussion with business people, it's very helpful, because then you can just say, so here we have a functional block that is concerned about, I don't know, compensation planning or something. And then in the solution process flow, you can show the details, right? And the details sometimes are too much to really get the overview. So the solution value flows are very helpful. When it comes to real process execution, for sure, you need the process flows, because there you need to know in what order, what participant of a process has to execute what steps, what are the gateways, what are the decision points we have to take, what events need to occur during process execution. All this information need to be available if you really want to architect the detailed process flow of a process. And this is exactly the reason why we also added here the BPMN functionality to our Cloud ALM, that you can define these detailed flows, and there you can also then reuse the so-called solution activities. Solution activities are, at the end of the day, nothing else than process steps, right? So what are the particular process steps you execute? And you can bring them in order. You can activate them, and then you make them available in the process management part where you can scope them. So we established kind of a version management here for those solution processes, but we tried to make it really, really simple. If you have a solution process, if you have a custom solution process, it may exist in two versions only. It can exist as a draft version, or it can be active. So what is behind a draft version? A draft version, so if you create your new solution process first place, and that you see also in the status scheme on the lower right of the screen, you have only a draft version. And the draft version is not visible to other parts of Cloud ALM. A draft version only exists or is only visible in the solution authoring, in the process authoring area. You can play around, you can change it, you do not disturb other people, you can create garbage processes, you can create real processes, you can do whatever you want there. Nobody will see it. But then, if you think your process is good enough, you have the activate button. And then you can activate your process. Excuse me. And if you activate your process, at that point in time, it gets visible to everybody else. So you make it available, and then also the other microservices can work with it. With deactivate, you push it into the central process library I talked about earlier. And then you can scope it into your implementation projects. And that's exactly where we do the handover to the process implementation, to the process management portion. Because this is exactly the area where we are scoping processes. So if you have an implementation project where you start to implement your solution processes, you need to know what are those processes you plan to implement, and then you will pull them in. You have the process content library, which is available down there, and then you do the scoping activity, and then you just pull in these processes into the process scope of your implementation project. And now you see that we also highlighted here some more areas in that yellow color. So the process scope, which is part of the project, is also highlighted now. Okay, how does that work? Or what processes are available for scoping? So far, we always talked about the intelligent enterprise suite processes, and we talked about SAP best practices for S/4HANA Cloud. That was already a good portion of content. But over the next months, we plan to extend that by several other processes. So first of all, we also want to add the on-premise scope, and we also want to increase the country version coverage. So we are right now in working on these elements here, on these extensions. So that's why I added here a star, because unfortunately you cannot see it if you enter the system right now, but hopefully you will see it soon. So we will add additional country versions, and we will add the on-premise scope. We will also add SuccessFactors content. So, and the SuccessFactors content, colleagues, they have two sets of processes. They have on one hand side the SuccessFactors process library that came originally from the SuccessFactors services branch, so that the consultants there maintain solution processes, and they structured them quite nicely into 14 solution scenarios, delivering 46 solution processes. Then we get also the HR processes that were originally maintained by the SAP best practices folks, so that those come with additional 43 solution processes. And then we will also add the procurement part to the overall picture. And then we have also the SAP Ariba content delivering additional 32 solution processes. And as you can see from that picture here, the scope of processes will grow and grow over time. And even now, we are like on the way of extending the process coverage dramatically. So that will be a big step forward. So especially if we have the SuccessFactors content in, and I will show you in the demo in a second. Okay, then you pull in these standard processes in so-called scopes. So a scope is an entity that you define when you are scoping the process scope of an implementation project. And you would define scopes for processes that are naturally managed together. So for instance, if you have processes that are supposed to serve the same functional purpose, or if processes follow the same upgrade cycle as they run in the same tenant or in the same managed system, then you would combine them into a scope. Yeah, so for instance, if you have in your plant Berlin, for your plant Berlin, your own S4 tenant, then you would combine all the processes that belong to the plant Berlin into a single scope, because then you can make sure that you can upgrade all these processes, including all the dependencies together. Yeah, so then you have like really bundled the stuff in a way that it's also it comes handy for upgrades, for instance, or for system upgrades, that you have them together and that you know exactly what is affected when you do the upgrade. So a scope is then an entity you would define, and here you will see that we are changing the scoping experience a little bit. So we will come with a managed scopes app that will look like the screenshot that we have here on the right. And there you see already different solution scenarios that are available. And here you can easily say from a high-level scoping perspective, so here for my plant Paris, I want to pull in processes that come from my custom authoring, so for my custom solution processes area, or I want to add, for instance, success factors content that is about compensation, or that is about managed benefits, or that is about onboarding new employees. So I can really then also define here on a high level what are the functional process areas I want to add here to my implementation scope. And that makes a lot of sense, because you can also later pick the start version. So for instance, for best practices for S/4HANA Cloud, there are multiple versions available. And if you now load the content into your tenant or into your Cloud ALM tenant into your scope, you want to determine what is the version I want to use. Do I go for 2108, or do I go for 2105 or 2102? You can define that. And then you can pull in the content in the right version as you require it. And at a later point in time, and I think Michael Klepper mentioned that already, you can then also control in this UI the upgrade. So you can define here that UI will inform you about new content available, if new content scenarios are available in new versions, and then you can upgrade them. And then the Cloud ALM will help you with all these mechanics. Okay, so the scoping experience, this is quite simple and it's quite straightforward. If you define certain solution scenarios as in scope, then you can click on edit scope, and then you can just use there the scope switch button to pull in processes into your process implementation scope. That's quite straightforward, I would say. When you scope your processes and when you define your scopes, we will also define a number of tasks, a number of foundation tasks, and that are standard tasks you usually run in each and every implementation project. And this is certainly around the fit to standard workshops, yeah, because you need to find out what are the extensions required, what are the configurations required, how well is the fit of the process to the customer. Yeah, so you run your fit to standard workshops, so you schedule it, you conduct your fit to standard workshops. When you capture the requirements in the fit to standard workshops, you should review them, and then I guess quite often some rework is required on the requirements. You need to complete them. At the end of the day, if you finished the requirements, you need to approve them, and you need to give the work to the different consultants and people working in the project. You have to confirm the scope and the requirements, and then later on, for sure, if you've done, for instance, adjustments, and if you need, for instance, additional manual test cases, you would also go for defining these test cases. And that are standard tasks we just right away generate for each scope that you create in the system. Goody. So why are the fittostandard workshops so important? I think I mentioned that several times, but that's really so straight to my heart, because I feel this is so important that we have a common understanding on that. The process scope together with the requirements is the project implementation scope. That's so important to understand, because if you only know the processes, you haven't won anything. If you only know some requirements, it doesn't help you either. The combination of both that really makes the process, because then you know what are you going to implement and you know exactly what do you need to change. And the fittostandard workshop is exactly the thing that determines scope and requirements, and which creates you the needed transparency on what needs to be done in a project. So this is really so important. Okay, fittostandard workshops. I believe so. I will not stay too long on that slide. So this is like bread and butter for every consultant and for everybody who's in the SAP business for a while. We are talking so much about fittostandard. This is a standard slide from the Activate colleagues. And there you see that it's about reviewing the processes, demonstrating the processes to your business counterparts, discuss the processes and discuss the customer's requirements. So if they tell you we need an additional column here in the table because otherwise we cannot really make sense out of it, then you should add it, and then you identify, so to say, the data requirements that you then can also find out what needs to be configured to make that reality, and then you can enable the customer to also run the processes themselves. And that's around the fittostandard circle that really is the core of any start of an SAP implementation project. No matter if you talk S4, success factors, or the like, you usually start with fittostandard workshops. Okay, so let's go into the demo. I think I have 5 minutes time for the demo, and then we have time for the Q&A. So let me share my browser. So I'm pretty sure that the browser logged off in the meantime, but I can log in again. That will not be an issue. So forget about the UI you see right now. That's very internal for me, because this is our internal development environment, because we are doing a little bit of lab preview, as I want to show you also a few elements here that are on the way and that are coming soon. I certainly want to show you the BPMN modeling. I find that so important, and for that reason, let me toggle here the right feature toggles that you can then also see how the process modeling looks like, or will look like, once it hits you. Okay, so this is the Cloud ALM. I think this is something you know. So let's go first a little bit into process authoring, because this is pretty nice feature. Let me show you a little bit of BPMN modeling here. So I hit here the create button, and then you see that you have here 2 entry fields. So here we have the name of the process. So I will do my custom point of sales process. Yeah, that will be the process I do. And that belongs, or that's an implementation of order to cash. Yeah. So I will pick just the business process variant, order to cash. You remember the SAP Enterprise Architecture Methodology. You have a solution process. This is my custom point of sales process. And you have that process responding to a business process. And this is order to cash. Order to cash is the business process. And now I just create here a respective solution process. And when we create a solution process, I can give the solution process here some description. Yeah, description, this is about something, right? Then I can save it. So now I created my solution process. And then here on the solution value flow, I have the possibility to define my process scope. So I could say, for instance, this is here about creating orders. Yeah, I could say this is about, I don't know, let's create here something addition. This is about collect revenues if we are at point of sales activities. So, and now I can like high level describe what is the scope of my process. I can also model, for instance, if I find it appropriate, sub processes, and I can add those activities to the sub processes to make it a little bit clearer. This is like the revenue part. This is the actual sales part. So then I can also structure my processes, right? So this is here the actual sales, and this is the revenue collection and reporting part. So I can describe here now the scope of my process. And now let's say I also want to describe the details of the process execution. And for that, I can here jump to the solution process flow part. And I can also hit the edit button. And now I have the full beauty of BPM and modeling available, because now I can add here, let's say, a pool. This is like my order to cash in the point of sales variant. Then I have here my, I don't know, my sales representative that is around here. Then, so helping the people in the shop, for instance. Then I have right here, I have my the people that sits at the that are responsible for the payment at the end, and then I can start to define here the flow of my process. And this is really about BPM and modeling. I can add here, I don't know, create a delivery. I know this step doesn't make sense in sales, in a point of sales process, but I think for us here, it's just sufficient. I can reuse these processes. I have a create sales order down here. So I can really now also distribute the activities here among the pools and the lanes that we have, and I can really define my process flows down here, right? So here I have another one, I link that, and then I have my end event, and so on and so forth. So I can really do like BPM and modeling here. I can save it. You see it's a draft version. I can hit activate, and I can make it part of my implementation project afterwards. Yeah, so that's quite straightforward, but I don't want to focus on that now. In my second part of the demo, I just wanted to show you a little bit of the new content that we get, because this is really something new.
You have 5 minutes left, and we have some questions in the Q&A pod.
Absolutely, then I restrict my demo to 1 more minute. You see here the solution scenarios, and here you see in this tenant, we already deployed the SuccessFactors processes. And let me show you these processes. So let's go here for a scope that I created in advance. This is the scope for HR. You see that we have here all the different processes in place. So, and here, let's say which one we want to take. I like the compensation processes. Where's compensation there? Long-term incentive. This is super. So let's take long-term incentive. I click on it. Now you see solution value flow. You get here an overview. What is the scope of this process here? Yeah. So here we have prepare budgets, we have prepare reviews, and we have the execute LTI review. And if I want to know what are the details of that, I can go for the solution process flow. And now here I see the concrete process execution that happens here in the SuccessFactors system. And I can also switch between the different processes and process flows that are available in the solution process now. So, and this is then also content that we are shipping soon to you that you can use to jumpstart with your implementation projects. Having said that, I believe we should then go to Q&A. So Melanie, can you moderate us through the Q&A, please?
Yes, of course. Fabian had a question. but not really a question and a remark. Some cool features at modeling, why they are not available at Solman. I mean the layouting from shapes at the universal diagram.
Yeah, so there we went two different paths. In Solution Manager, we are not really following the Enterprise Architecture Methodology. You can do some modeling that's compliant to it, but it's much more freestyle than what we have in Cloud ALM. So we go two different paths there, unfortunately. And you can imagine there will be more change over time, because you heard that we just acquired Signavio as a company, and that will certainly also impact the overall modeling experience. But the good message about that is, so we just had this week a meeting with Gero Decker, founder of Signavio, and he said, so Signavio and Cloud ALM, this is really a love relationship. And I can only agree to that, because we are really sharing the same principles there. We have the same ideas, and we certainly go for integrating our environments. And the focus on these integration activities will be the Cloud ALM part. And with the Solution Manager parts, we will also discuss possible integrations.
As you mentioned Signavio, Wolf, there is a question regarding Signavio. How does the modeling relate to the Signavio integration?
That's what I just said. So we will evolve. So we will combine the tooling certainly over time. Signavio and Cloud ALM, we really are a love relationship. So we really work together, and we are working on providing shared modeling capabilities, so shared modeling service, shared requirement services, and so on and so forth, so that we can really provide over time a unified modeling experience to our customers that is based on Signavio technology, but which is integrated into Cloud ALM, and that is also used by Signavio. So you are definitely on the right track if you start with the Cloud ALM, as all models we create here have to go into a future integration as well. So this is definitely not a wrong choice, and we are in intensive discussions to bring together the toolings.
Okay, I think we are running out of time a bit. I would take the other questions with me in the Meet the Expert session in the afternoon.
Thanks a lot, Melanie. Thanks a lot for the questions.